when I was thinking about this panel, I pulled out Google and looked up a few definitions of some words that I thought related to what we're going to be speaking of. Community, unity, and communication. Now, community comes from communis, that's a Latin word, and it actually stems out from a word that's common. It means, what do we have in common? Do we have in common a place? Do we have in common a set of values? Do we share a common field in the middle of our town? So communities really were formed around how people had something in common. I liked also the definition that they had in biology, a group of interdependent organisms of different species growing or living together in a specified habitat. You might think common as homogeneous, or just simply one characteristic. But I like the interdependence of it, because I think that represents what we, as people, interdependent organisms, need to do together. And of course, the society kind of definition is the people of a district or a country considered collectively, especially in the context of social values and responsibilities. So we might see communities as separate, we might see them together. And that togetherness is the unity piece. Unity comes from unis, one, and that is a thing forming a complex whole. A thing forming a complex whole. That is such a great definition. Our country, our community here, certainly is a complex whole. And how do we have unity in that? Again, it's not just you're with me or against me. It's more of, what are we together? And to find out what that is really about communication. Communication, I was surprised. I thought, well, it's just going to be sort of community. It's actually comes from communicare, which means to share. So it's not a broadcast, send it out, big loudspeaker. Communication is a sharing of understanding. It's an imparting or exchanging of information or news. It's also the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings. So it's something we share. We share community, we share communication. We're looking for what we are as a complex whole, and that way we are community together. That, in essence, is what we're talking about today, is thinking about ourselves as a community that's sharing communication, and how do we build that? How do we build that in the midst of much information, I wouldn't say communication, that might divide us or separate us or say we're different, or that's not us, or you're not me, we're not together. How do we bridge that sort of natural tendency to think of a community as maybe just myself and my family, or people that I absolutely identify with? So today we have a panel of 3 distinguished Toastmasters. This is a little DTM behind each of these people. These people have attained the highest recognition in Toastmasters. And because of that, I think they are eminently qualified to be able to talk about community and unity and communication and how we do this together. So I'll introduce each of them, and then we'll have a little short perspective from each. So Chris Withrow has been a Toastmaster since 2002. She really believes in the value of community and the value that comes into our lives when we live next to other people and we have healthy communities. Her neighborhood includes 95-year-old Gladys, right next door, and 4 college guys that live across the street who play basketball and hockey in the streets whenever they can. Diana Hutchinson has been a Toastmaster since 1983. My wife since 1987. She's going to share a perspective on how international relationships and understanding that those differences can help humanize people and strengthen our local and our global communities. When we know about each other and ourselves, we can be stronger together. And finally, Reed Schloss has been a Toastmaster since 2009. He wants to address the growing abuse of public shaming and what we can do to encourage effective dialogue without that public shaming. He's wondering if there's a better model, and we'll explore that together. So I think all our panelists, before they talk, because they're sitting down, deserve a nice round of applause, and then we'll start in with Chris. Chris, why don't you share your perspective with us?
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, it is one perspective. But it's a perspective that I have really been enjoying for the last 10 years. My husband and I moved into our neighborhood in the middle of winter. Of course, we didn't have a chance to meet many people at that point. Who tromps around in a very cold January and says, hi, I'm your new neighbor. It just doesn't happen. Over the years, we have come to realize that our neighborhood is also a very popular neighborhood for college students. And because of that, I've really begun looking at how we can integrate a neighborhood that Chris mentioned, 95-year-old Gladys, who used to be an ER nurse and is absolutely awesome, but she goes to bed when it's dark. Along with, gosh, Tyler and Nick and Joey and the guys who love to play out in the street till all hours. Now, we're fortunate in our neighborhood that they don't live right across the street from each other. They live down a little ways. But there have been times we've been told in the past when there were problems. So I wanted to research this. How do communities deal with this? How can we ensure that our neighborhood becomes a community no matter which students move in, which families move out? How do we do that? And a lot of that has to do with being willing to do the work ourselves, right? It's hard to say, they're really not a good neighbor if I'm not being a good neighbor. One of the things that different places around the country have chosen to do is to have neighborhood associations that go to the rental agencies or to the universities, and they say, look, before you give our new neighbors the keys, and we have no problem, you're going to give them the keys, but we want to be there. We want to represent. And it's part greeting wagon and part paddy wagon. We love having you in our neighborhood, no matter where you're from. And typically in a town like Fort Collins, we have students from all over the country. We love having you in our neighborhood. Are you aware of the local ordinances on noise and fire, open fire, all kinds of interesting things? And having a discussion beforehand. But it can't stop there, of course. We need to continue that as neighbors. We need to know not just our college students. We need to know Gladys. We need to know Phoebe and Ron. We need to know all of the neighbors and all of their families. How many of you, if I said, you know all your neighbors, every one of them around your house, how many of you will raise your hand? A few. Good. But in even a small group like this, I didn't see half. That's an important thing. And college students from wherever they're at are just one more really important component to communities.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Diana, how about talking about the international relationships? Fill us in on your perspective.
One of my early experiences was sitting at a restaurant in Taiwan, looking down at a cream sauce with some tentacles sticking out and a very crispy pastry crust, trying to find out what it was. And I asked my Taiwanese host what this was called. After a lot of back and forth, I finally decided it was something like cream-chipped octopus in a coffin. And it was pretty tasty when I tried it. When we get to know people who are different from us, it expands our perspectives and it makes our lives richer. I think often we live in fear of that which is different from us. America has a huge history of fearing immigrants or fearing people who are different from us and dehumanizing people in wars. The exchange trip that I was on, I was fortunate to get to stay with families in Japan and Taiwan and Korea, and we also visited China and Hong Kong. And it was part of the people-to-people high school student ambassador program. And that program was started by Eleanor Roosevelt as a way to build international friendships so that we would see each other as human beings and be less likely to want to go to war with each other. This idea of meeting people from different places is not new. I heard that Martha Washington and George Washington did a lot of matchmaking between northern senators and southern belles to create relationships between the North and the South and to make those early efforts to integrate us as a country. I've had several exchange students and au pairs, and that's one of the ways we as a family work to build international peace and also build personal relationships. From my exchange student, Irina, from Bulgaria and Germany, I learned that if you hang your clothes on the line upside down, you don't get pinch marks on your shoulders of your clothes. From my Zulu au pair from South Africa, I learned that if you don't have a baby backpack, you can use a beach towel in a pinch to hold your baby on your back. I've also learned that if I feel really more frustrated than it seems like I should feel with somebody, there's probably a cultural rule that I don't even know I have that's gotten broken. And I've experienced that with children, with coworkers, and with international students. And being aware of that has really been beneficial to me. So I think there are so many ways for us to get involved and build international relations. By having people come live with you, I think that's a great way for you to get to know somebody on a deeper level. And also, you're helping the whole community because they've probably never met someone from Thailand or from South Africa either. And so you're bringing that opportunity to the whole community.
Thank you. Reed, what's your perspective?
I agree with many of the things that have already been said here. I think a community is really built upon relationships. And one of the biggest killers of relationships right now, I believe, is this element of public shaming. Trial by Twitter or social media mob meetings that happen. It creates this environment that people are fearful to act or to say what they really feel because they're not sure that they want to fill the flames, if you will, of social media against them. I know that that also creates some extreme cases, but still it is a powerful influence that has been used in this throughout history. Even in this country, the early colonists, they'd set up a post out in the middle of their square where they would lock people in that the community could come and publicly shame them, spit upon them, throw rotten fruit at them. It was a shame. It was terrible. But it was their way, they thought, of changing the behavior of someone that might have had some indiscretions or had a problem with stealing or something like that. But we still need laws and we still need to make those publicly visible to the community. But this notion of public shaming, I believe it's gone too far. It's reached a point where it's become vindictive. And it's created by a community that is more of that community of, I don't care. I don't care how you feel. And that is because they don't have this connection, this relationship with others. In a way, I think it's created a complex hole, not the type of hole, but this sinkhole of our behavior getting worse and worse. So from my perspective, I think that's something that as a community, as leaders, we need to counteract in a huge way from a perspective of being optimistic about what people do. I learned a very important lesson. I had kind of a conflict with a colleague, a neighbor, and one day I decided just to have lunch with him. As we talked and I understood his challenges, his fight with cancer, and he understood my challenges, my wife, and her challenges with CF and needing a double lung transplant. The next time we had lunch, he asked, would it be okay if I said a prayer for us over our food? And I was touched by how he prayed for me and my wife. Now I can tell you, the contrast of our relationship changed drastically just by having lunch. So rather than publicly shaming and creating these mobs that create this separation, I think we need to eat together more. We need to have these dialogues, create these relationships, and we should not, by all means, use anything in our communication that would publicly shame a person.
Thank you. Thank you. Real powerful thoughts, and what I want to do is think about some questions I want to offer all of you and see how we're connected on that. And to do that, it's really easy. I mean, I know with the mobs, I haven't seen any mobs in northern Colorado that I know, or southern Wyoming, which is a good thing, perhaps, or maybe I'm just not aware. But I'd like to see if we could draw a gentle boundary around sort of the area that maybe we serve. It would be easy to think of Washington, D.C. and California and these other places that may seem extremely different, but trying to figure out if we use that as a community area. What do you see as the state of communication in our community? What are your reflections on
Well, I think I have an example of a scenario that would be something Reed would be in favor of. A few years ago, 2 or 3, some of the college kids had a party. Boy, did it get out of hand. Oh my Lord. They didn't even know hardly any of the people. It was huge. There were drunken students in the wee hours of the morning. And it was utter chaos. And the police had to be called. Because we were able to know these students, because we had even a basic relationship with them, they came to us and apologized, and that was done. One of the things I think Reed talks about is that then there's this reputation, and they're forever, outcast in the neighborhood. And really, we need to be aware of our own little, whether it's Fort Collins, northern Colorado, it's easy to let someone feel like they're now an outcast because they did something not okay. It was really important that once they came and apologized, that was not discussed again.
You didn't write letters to the Coloradoan?
We didn't. What do you know? We didn't. We made sure that the other neighbors knew that the guys had come and apologized. Not all of the neighbors in our neighborhood knew the kids, so they didn't feel comfortable going over to the far end and talking, but the apology was just as valid. And we were able to make sure. So instead of being that mob for the negative, it's important to take every opportunity you can to be that mob for the better. To say, there was something that was remediated here and we need to share it.
So I hear some grace and trust in the relationship, reinforced through action
Right.
to help that go well. Yeah,
Yes.
Thanks. How about our other panels? State of communication in our community. What do you think?
Well, it's clearly very effective with the youth.
Mm-hmm.
They are connected, and if they are trying to get something to happen, man, they can make it happen in just minutes. So they're connected. But I worry about the more mature group. The element of, we're tied up with our work, we have other focuses, but yet how do we How do we receive those communications? How do we get information that will help us know what's happening within the community? I think it's easy just to say, well, we posted it on the webpage. You know, and that misses the mark. I think there needs to be more of a progressive effort to have these social elements that happen throughout the community that create more of a connection.
Yeah, Diana?
I know we have a app called nextdoor.com, and a lot of people are on that. I think that brings a lot of good things, and every once in a while you do see the negativity creep into that, and usually people are pretty good about saying, hey, that's not what this is for. Anytime you're communicating electronically, there's a whole lot of connection and interpretation that is unavailable. And so one of the things I appreciate about Fort Collins is a big effort on neighborhood night outs and trying to encourage people to build personal relationships in neighborhoods, which is a continuous effort because people move in and out, so you have to keep building that.
I think one of the things that, and when you're talking about examples, and I suppose this could be a positive and negative example in some way, the Muslim center that got vandalized, I remember that I was in church and I got a note from a rabbi who said, hey, we should show up because we are one community, and literally within hours there was lots of people there, which was really fantastic. So that part of it worked well. I also heard later that there was vandalism of the Mormon temple as it was being constructed, but I didn't hear about that at the time, and I don't know if it just, my communication didn't connect or it wasn't a lone action, or I'm not sure what happened, but it made me a little sad that I didn't have an opportunity to reach out that way to say, hey, that's definitely part of our community as well. So I think that sort of, it's I would say a little bit fractured, although people are trying to hold it together. Maybe there's some connections you wouldn't otherwise see, those personal connections that really can make that communication work. What have you seen or heard that can hope that we can get better? Besides some of these examples, is there anything else that you've seen that, you know, there's, we could do better as a community in communicating and building bridges of understanding?
Well, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the opportunities at CSU with their international students. They have I think it's the first Friday evening where you can go to the International House and just socialize with people, with international students. And they also have an International Friends program where you could sign up to be a liaison, be a friend to an international student or international family students and do a few activities with them over the semester. Or you could sign up to be a host family where when someone first is coming into the country, you have the opportunity to be their introduction and help them have a really positive idea of what Fort Collins and America is like. So those are some really easy ways to step into some international relationships within Fort Collins.
Nice, thank you. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I also think that Fort Collins perhaps does a little better job than some communities. For instance, John and I live not far from Elizabeth, pretty far to the west of campus. And we were looking as a community at the traffic and all of the interesting scenarios that happen. Well, the city organized it. They sent out multiple flyers and emails, and they publicized it in a lot of ways, and they asked for community input. They closed it down one day. Oh man, that was fun. Do fun little tours.
Open streets day.
Yeah, the open streets day, and they had people out there gathering information. How do you want us to handle this particular corridor of your city? What will work best for you? Since then, they've widened streets a little. They've made sure bike lanes are better. They have a flashing crosswalk. It's really close to the King Soopers parking lot, so you may get a double stop, but you'll make it. It really has helped tremendously, I think. So I'm really pleased that Fort Collins, when they become aware, they really try, at least from my experience, to improve and do it better. build that
Yeah.
community.
So read anything that you've seen that's helping in that manner or gives you hope?
It does. For me, one of the biggest things that I have seen is the business community, in particular, how generous they are to nonprofit organizations in the area. In the past 2 months, I've attended 2 different galas where over $250,000 was raised from the people that were just there to help support marvelous organizations here in this area. And that is a reflection of the business leadership in this area, as well as the community at large. There's this great generosity, and I believe a community that gives is really a strong community. And so I think that's one of the strongest things that's happening, the right things in this community that is really supportive, because it's supporting a variety of different needs, from Hearts from Horses to respite care, to you name it. It's being involved and getting involved that I think is the key. And as long as the community continues to give up not only their financial needs, but of their time and effort, that's where they actually will create more relationships that are the foundation that will make us strong.
Awesome. Just in the same way that even though sounds like we all live in Fort Collins, which is sort of a center of mass of this region, this community, there's a bigger community than just our panelists. So I'd like to turn it to the group. And what questions do you have or ideas might you have around building bridges, building understanding, building communication so that we have a stronger community? This is the audience participation part. You get to, it's the snack fee, so just let you know.
Yeah.
Joe, go ahead.
Tying on with Diane, what you're saying, I guess, actually, several of you were talking about kind of the interaction with the community and I guess the reaction of Fort Collins. One of the things I'd really like to see is some kind of way of having neighborhoods have local activities, local cafes or restaurants, kind of like the Washington Park type of thing that Denver has, where it kind of brings together people there rather than these strip malls and things you drive to and interact with other people, but the community, the local neighborhood doesn't have that kind of environment. For younger kids, you've got the parks and the schools, and that helps. But that doesn't bring the adults together.
Yeah, if you look at historically, if you go back into the Boston area, the Vermont area, the little community has a central point where they meet. And I was in Vermont about 10 years ago, and every summer Saturday night, they had a community event. And it was held at the Center Park that had a gazebo, and there was some music playing, but then there were games that were being played that were like quarter games, but that was actually a fundraiser for some of the youth groups in the community. And as I walked through that on 2 occasions, I was just impressed how much the community was actually talking. With a community that is as large as Fort Collins or this area, that's kind of challenging, because you do have Old Town, and it's a congregating place, but the community is really the smaller. But the way the city planning has gone into place, so that each square mile has some dynamics that could support that, I think that's one of the keys to how do you get people to come. And I can say I'm a recovering engineer for Hewlett Packard, and I have this aversion to be in large groups, but Toastmasters has helped me with that. All I know is that sometimes it's hard when you get done with work to come home and say, oh, I'm gonna go socialize. But yet, every time I do it, I come back the better. So it's taking that first step, getting out the door and going and knocking on a neighbor's door.
Diane, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think one opportunity, I think walkable cities and neighborhoods is vital, and I appreciate actually in Fort Collins there is a focus on that now. I think an opportunity we have today that hasn't always been there is things like meetups. and things like Toastmasters groups, where I love about Toastmasters that we bring together people into little mini communities and build relationships and get to talk to people who have different political perspectives and experiences. And I think meetup groups provide a really unique opportunity to connect with people who have similar interests and get involved and build community.
Great. Other questions? Anybody have another questions?
Not a question, but I have a comment. I
Sure.
think it requires some energy, and you have to make the commitment. And you mentioned when you came in that you're an introvert. The first time I took the Myers-Briggs, I was as far on the introvert scale as it is possible to be. And I think that's difficult for me, but it's something I've made a real effort to try to do. And I found community in very odd places, because my Zumba class is a really interesting community because it's very caring, very supportive. Anyone who walks in the door is introduced, people introduce themselves, they bring them to a preferred spot on the floor, we have a potluck. I mean, it's just very surprising to me that you think you're just going to an exercise class and then you end up with a community. And I think communities can happen serendipitously like that. And I think that's something that happens a lot in Fort Collins. And I also think the city does work to promote that because they give many grants to communities to have community events. And I know every summer there's a little community neighborhood get together, and sometimes it's a sheet on someone's backyard where they play movies on the sheet, and sometimes it's just a hot dog gathering. But that's supported by the city, so there obviously is a commitment to trying to foster that, even though there isn't the same kind of neighborhood that you may see in other places. I mean, I remember being, when I took my daughter to San Francisco, there was a whole little city within a 2 or 3 block area. There was a hardware store and a fruit market and everything within about 3 blocks. And that doesn't really happen here, but I do think the city makes an effort to try to help people find a way to get together with their neighbors.
Nice. John, your comment or question?
It's really a question, just perhaps more of a brainstorming sort of thing. It's just it begins with a recognition of the fact that I think people have been separated in individual houses for so long that separation has become comfortable. And so there's a certain amount of inertia that one has to get over in order for these kinds of things that you've been describing would actually happen. What are some creative ideas that you would have on getting people into the streets?
Well, a couple summers ago, and we did this pretty regularly. I haven't done it the last couple summers because now I'm working. The year that I was unemployed, on Saturday mornings, it was up by 7:30, brew 2 or 3 pots of coffee, get the crosswords out for the newspaper or whatever, set up the table at the end of the driveway, have plenty of cups and creamer and sugar, and as people were getting up and going about their day, hey, you want a cup of coffee? I've got plenty. It was just something from my neighborhood. It's not something that everybody took advantage of, but it is something that, okay, I was a little hyper-caffeinated on the weekend. But it can be really effective, even if they don't, oh, I really don't do coffee, but what are you doing here? It brings up the conversation. If nobody stops, I can be an introvert and just sit out there and read my newspaper, do my crossword puzzle.
That's a lot of coffee.
That's a lot of coffee. We do iced coffee later, we save it, yeah. But it's something, if we just put ourselves out, then the chances are we'll get some kind of response. We don't have to put ourselves out all the way. Even just stepping out can get at least some interaction.
Well, maybe this would be a good time to sort of get that call from action from each of you, to have this a short synopsis of, based on the conversation you've had with each other and your ideas, what would you ask of our audience and really of ourselves as a call to action to help build community?
So I've got 3 things. One is get out and walk. Not only is it good for our community to be healthy, but every morning after you've slept for whatever time it is, your body has built up CO2. And as you walk, it's the fastest way to whisk that off of your body and get a clear head again. The second thing is while you're walking, say happy day to somebody. Not just good morning, because it is a good morning. But if it's a happy Saturday, people smile. It changes their perspective. I've done that as a constant walking up a power line trail, back and forth, and I walk with purpose. I'm pretty fast. But as I say it, I'll have some that are wearing earbuds and they'll stop and they'll pull that. What'd you say? And I said, happy Saturday. I thought that's what you said. Thanks. You know, it's one of those things that just changes a perspective. The other is ask someone who they are. My little phrase that I use is, I don't think I've met you before. Now, the first time I did that to a couple of people, they were a little bit scared because I'm wearing my black, thin, slimming looking, jogging outfit. And I didn't realize with the beanie on top, I looked like a robber.
Oh, yeah.
A mugger, yeah. But it's surprising to find who's in your neighborhood. And that by them knowing you, all of a sudden you have an association. I've now found that group of people that walk about my time or run or ride their bike, that it's like, didn't see you yesterday. What happened? Now it's a community. We're looking out for each other. Those are the three things I recommend.
Nice.
Thank you. I would like to encourage you to think about hosting an exchange student. Many people think that you need to have a high school student to host somebody, and that's not the case at all. In fact, sometimes it's better if your kids are already moved out, you have that extra room, you have that extra time. Or if you have a toddler, that can be a great interaction with that as well. So don't let your lack of having a high school student at home stop you from thinking about having an exchange student. It'll make your life richer, and it'll also be an opportunity for them. And then the other thing is on a smaller scale, go to CSU and get involved with the international community there. Be a friend, be a host family. You can do some things that don't require a long time commitment and can make a huge difference in your experience and also for this other person. And then finally, if you do have the opportunity to go travel internationally, go beyond just the touristy things. One opportunity you have that not everyone has is you can visit a Toastmasters club. There are Toastmasters clubs in just about every country, and it's so fun to visit. The one that I visited in Amsterdam, even though they were speaking in Dutch, I still understood a lot of what was going on, and it was really fun. So take the opportunity to meet somebody who's different from yourself.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, I guess I would encourage everyone to be the neighbor they want to be, right? If you think, gosh, it would be awesome to have a neighbor who, whatever, fill in that blank. Be the neighbor who does that. Be what you want to be, what you want others to be. And to conquer our fears. We are all different on the introvert-extrovert range. Linda says she was all the way to one end of introvert. I'm pretty much on the other end, I admit, for the extrovert. But all of us can push ourselves to modify our personalities just enough that we can also relate to the people around us, whether they're 95 or 25 or even younger, as sometimes they act. It's worth it every time if we just get out there and try. Be the neighbor you want to be.
Well, I appreciate the panel sharing these ideas and essentially building some unity and community right here in this room, getting some different perspectives out, and hopefully we'll be able to overcome the inertia, make the commitment, and have energy to go make our community a better place. Please help me welcome the panel here. right, so the panel's dismissed, and we'll bring up our evaluators, our coaches. Come on up. I feel like we should have an intermission break or something. Yeah, we'll do a panel thing there. Okay, let's do that. Do it. Good.
Close our stuff?
How are you, John?
We just sit where
Sit wherever you'd like.
our person is.
Sure, wherever you first, yeah, that's a good idea.
Are you leading us or am I leading us?
We could do it either way. What would you like to do?
I have no idea. I'm still trying to compose.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute intermission, and we'll reconvene at 20 after.